This presentation is about the different methods of educational and vocational assessment which are used to determine competence. It also explains how standard deviation calculations are used to produce result scales that enable comparison between widely different tests and examinations. To understand the Competition Information System, or CIS as we call it, and the 500-point scale, an understanding of the basic concepts of assessment is essential. In particular, the assessment of vocational skills. There are two common types of assessment: norm-based and criterion-based. Let's consider norm-based assessment first. In norm-based assessment, candidates are given some valid form of assessment, and the results are then graded like this. We plot the number of candidates on the y-axis and the score, whatever it may be, along the x-axis. Then we select the candidate results. At this level, the candidates fail. At this level, the candidates just pass. At this level, the candidates acquire a credit. And finally, at this level, the candidates get a distinction. This graph is typical of a norm-based examination result. In norm-based assessment, grade is related only to other candidates' scores. Note: an individual score has no real meaning. Here, a score of 25 resulted in a fail. But, had the results been between, say, 5 marks and 30 marks on the x-axis, a score of 25 might have been a distinction. So, a score of 70 on this scale may be a distinction, or, with scores like this, a fail. Once the results are recorded, the scores are no longer meaningful and should be removed. Now consider criterion-based assessment. In criterion-based assessment, we define precisely what someone must be able to do. We check to see if they can do it, and if they can, they pass. There's no comparison with other candidates. Can you identify an example of criterion-based assessment? What about the driving test? In a driving test, your ability is not compared with that of other candidates. Most countries say that they use this method to assess vocational skills. This is not exactly what commerce and industry require. After all, if you were interviewing 6 candidates for a job and they all had the same criterion-based qualification, you would want to know who could demonstrate the best speed, who was the most accurate, who produced the best quality products, and who was the most efficient. Therefore, a combination of both forms of assessment is often used because people want to know how well they achieved compared to their colleagues. So, what type of assessment do we want for a world skills competition? It will have to be norm-based because we are going to compare their relative skill levels. Let's have a more detailed look at norm-based assessment. Let's consider a situation where we have thousands of candidates sitting a national examination in a country. The thousands of candidates sit the examination, and the lowest score in the examination is 20 and the highest score is 70. A few candidates in the exam scored 20, 10,000 candidates scored 30, 20,000 candidates scored 33, and if we carry on plotting the graph, we can complete the graph to clearly show the achievement of all of the candidates. Now we know where a candidate is on this graph, we no longer need to know their score. So what do we know about this set of results? We know the least able scores are here, and the most able scores are here, and the average candidate scores are here. So these candidates are below average, and these are above average. The exact score is not important. A graph of this type usually has a normal distribution, where 34% of the scores are between the average and one standard deviation, and 14% of the scores are between 1 and 2 standard deviations, and 2% of the scores are between 2 and 3 standard deviations. And because the graph is symmetrical, we could use this as a new scale, like this. Where a competitor scoring +1 means they are better than 84% of their colleagues, and one scoring +2 means they are better than 98% of their colleagues. There are numerous well-known scales that are used. For example, the well-known IQ scale, where an IQ of 115 means the person's IQ is higher than 84% of the population. IQ scores are set to an average of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. World Skills sets one standard deviation to a score of 30. And sets the average to 500. Giving us the well-known 500-point scale, where competitors scoring 500 are average. So, competitors with scores here are below average, and competitors with scores here are above average. A competitor scoring 530 means they are better than 84% of their colleagues. And a competitor scoring 560 means they are better than, well, what are they better than? Yes, you've got it, 98% of their colleagues. When two skills have been marked with results like this on the 0 to 100 marking scale, we cannot immediately compare the competitor results. You can see that the average competitor in Skill 1 has attained a mark of about 80, whereas the average competitor in Skill 2 has only attained a mark of about 25. Is the average competitor in Skill 1 better than the average competitor in Skill 2? No, they are not. They are both average and should have the same score. But when the scores are converted to the 500-point scale, now we can compare competitor results between the skills, and you can see that the competitors who were average now have the same score. In this presentation, we learned about criterion and norm-based methods of educational and vocational assessment which are used to determine competence. That in norm-based assessment, standard deviation calculations can be used to produce result scales that enable comparison between widely different tests and examinations.